He stole my future, so I bought his empire, but now the real trap is set, and saving my life means choosing which empire to destroy next. The air in the cramped, dimly lit kitchen of my tiny apartment was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the sharp metallic tang of desperation. Across the chipped formica table sat Mark, my soon-to-be ex-husband, swirling the last dregs of cheap whiskey in a cracked tumbler. His smile, the one that used to feel like sunshine on a cold day, now felt like a rusty scalpel tracing the lines of my failure. "So, Artisan Soaps by Sarah," he drawled, the mockery dripping off his tongue like venom. He leaned back, his expensive suit jacket, paid for, ironically, by my tireless efforts during the first 5 years of our marriage, straining across his broad chest. "A boutique soap business. Really, Sarah? You finally leave the stability of a decent salary, the security of, well, us, to make artisanal bars that smell like lavender and existential dread?" I gripped my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles were white. I had poured every last penny of my severance, every late-night grant application, every scrap of hope I possessed into apothecary bloom. It was my baby. It was my escape. And he was systematically strangling it with every syllable. "It's a growing market, Mark. People want natural products. They want something handmade." I tried, my voice thin against the roar of his laughter. He set the glass down with a decisive thud. "People want efficiency, Sarah. They want scale. They want what my company, Apex Logistics, provides. We move the world. You're making bath bombs for bored housewives in the suburbs. Let's be realistic. When are you going to admit this little hobby is bankrupting you?" That stung. Deeply. He hadn't even bothered to look at my pitch decks, my meticulous spreadsheets detailing projections and profit margins. He only saw the domestic failure, the woman who dared to leave the gilded cage he'd built. "I'm not bankrupting anyone," I snapped back, the defensiveness bubbling up. "I'm building something from the ground up. It takes time." Mark just shook his head, a pitying, condescending gesture that always made my blood boil. "Time is money, sweetheart, and you're hemorrhaging both. Listen, I'm feeling generous. You have 6 months before the divorce settlement clears. Sell the inventory, pack up your little herb garden, and come crawling back. I could always use a receptionist who knows how to dust the mahogany." The insult was so calculated, so perfectly aimed at my pride, that it stole my breath. I saw the path ahead of me, a lonely uphill climb where every setback would be met with his smug confirmation of my inadequacy. But staring into his condescending eyes, something shifted inside me. The desperation didn't vanish, but it hardened, fusing with a cold, crystalline rage. "Keep your pity, Mark," I managed, pushing my chair back so abruptly it scraped loudly against the linoleum. "You think I need stability? You think I need your world?" I walked to the door, grabbing the worn leather portfolio containing my current month's invoices. "In 6 months, when the divorce is final, you won't recognize my little hobby. You won't even be able to afford to look at the kind of contracts I'll be signing." I slammed the door, the sound echoing through the silence he'd left behind. I walked straight to the farmer's market stall, the one I rented for $50 a weekend, and looked at my array of soaps, oatmeal, honey, activated charcoal. They smelled like possibilities. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I didn't look at Mark's number. I looked at the biggest, boldest name in regional distribution, Apex Logistics, and I opened my laptop, starting a deep dive into their publicly available financial statements, whispering one single venomous vow to the glowing screen: "I will buy you." A year passed in a blur of sleepless nights, fueled by caffeine and sheer spite. Apothecary Bloom exploded. My unique essential oil blends caught the eye of a major luxury hotel chain looking for exclusive amenities. The niche I'd carved out wasn't small, it was fiercely loyal. I scaled up production, hired staff, and started buying up small competitors. I was ruthless, driven by the memory of Mark's pitying smirk. Every successful contract felt like a punch landing squarely on his ego. We moved out of the apartment and into a converted warehouse, the air now smelling of raw materials and exponential growth. Then the whispers started. Apex Logistics, Mark's pride and joy, was bleeding. They had bet everything on a massive, long-term government contract that was suddenly under federal review due to alleged shady dealings in their acquisition division, the very division Mark oversaw. The rumors were ugly, and they were sinking the stock price faster than I could count the zeros on my bank statement. I watched the news reports with a detached satisfaction that bordered on euphoria. I'd been planning this acquisition for months, discreetly using shell corporations and the best financial lawyers money could buy, waiting for the perfect moment of maximum vulnerability. I knew Mark's arrogance meant he would never diversify. Apex was his entire world. Now that world was crumbling, and I was poised to be the vulture descending on the carcass. One Tuesday morning, I got the call. It was Mr. Henderson, Apex's long-suffering CFO, his voice strained and brittle. "Ms. Vance, I apologize for contacting you directly. Our board is in crisis. The federal investigation has frozen key assets, and we have a solvency deadline looming in 2 weeks. We are exploring all options for a rapid infusion of capital or a complete divestiture." He paused, clearly gulping air. "We need a buyer who can move quickly and quietly. I know this sounds insane given your background, but given your recent success and financial liquidity, you are, regrettably, our only viable option for absorbing the company whole, before the creditors seize everything." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, looking out the floor-to-ceiling window of my new, sleek, minimalist office. It was a better view than Mark's penthouse ever offered. I toyed with a heavy crystal paperweight, the kind Mark would have loved. "Mr. Henderson," I said, letting the silence stretch until it hummed with tension. "You're right. It sounds insane, but I think I can make it work." I steepled my fingers, the cold realization of my power washing over me. "Tell me everything. And tell Mr. Vance that I will be attending the emergency board meeting next Monday. I want to look him in the eye when I sign the paperwork." The next few days were a whirlwind of due diligence. A financial autopsy performed on the empire Mark had built by trampling over my dreams. The asking price was a fraction of its former value, a fire sale price based purely on panic. I signed the final agreement Friday afternoon, the ink still drying on the multi-million-dollar transfer documents that would make me the sole owner of Apex Logistics. I had done it. I had not only surpassed him, I had consumed him. Monday arrived, crisp and clear. I walked into the Apex boardroom, not as the scorned ex-wife, but flanked by my own legal team, dressed in a suit sharper than anything Mark owned. The mahogany table seemed to shrink under the weight of my presence. Mark was already there, pale and haggard, his expensive suit rumpled, looking like a ghost inhabiting his own shell. He didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, his eyes were wide, raw with disbelief, the color completely drained from his face. He tried to speak, a strangled sound catching in his throat. "Sarah? What in God's name?" I placed the certified letter from the bank. The notice stating the final transfer of ownership was complete, directly in front of him. "Good morning, Mark. Or should I say, good afternoon. I have a new title for you." The board members shifted nervously, avoiding his gaze. Henderson looked ill. I stood at the head of the table, my new domain surrounding me. I could feel Mark's gaze burning into me, a mixture of horror and a dawning, terrifying understanding. "Effective immediately," I announced, my voice clear, steady, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You are no longer the CEO of Apex Logistics. You are, however, still employed. I need a caretaker for the company's transition, someone who knows the internal infrastructure better than anyone. You will report directly to my newly appointed COO, effective immediately." Mark leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table, his voice finally regaining some of its old aggression, albeit shaky. "You think you can just buy my life out from under me? I built this. You think some little soap gimmick gives you the right to humiliate me like this?" I smiled, a slow, cold curve of my lips that echoed the one he'd worn a year ago. "Humiliate you? Mark, this isn't humiliation. This is just business. And since you're the expert on my previous failure," I continued, leaning in closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper only he could hear, "I wanted to make sure you understood the full scope of this acquisition. I didn't just buy the company." I paused, watching the blood drain from his face entirely as he realized the implication. "I also bought the building it operates in, every piece of inventory, and just to be thorough, Mark—" My eyes locked onto his, shining with victory. "I bought the outstanding mortgage on your house. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises, or the locks will be changed by my security team." The silence that followed my pronouncement was absolute, broken only by the faint whirring of the building's ventilation system, a system I now technically owned. Mark didn't move. He looked like a marble statue that had just been told it was crumbling from the inside out. His meticulously styled hair seemed to deflate. The sheen had gone from his eyes, replaced by a terrifying, glassy blankness. The other board members, bless their opportunistic hearts, began to clear their throats, eager to distance themselves from the collapsing structure of Mark's leadership and align themselves with the new authority. Mr. Henderson, the CFO, was already shuffling papers, looking for the official transfer protocol. "Sarah," Mark finally managed, the single word barely audible, thick with a cocktail of shock and impotent fury. He looked around the room, searching for allies who were no longer there, finding only eager sycophants polishing their resumes for me. "You can't do this. You don't understand the liabilities. The federal review. It's a ticking time bomb. You'll inherit massive legal debt, regulatory fines that could sink you by Christmas." I allowed myself a small, patronizing sigh. "Oh, Mark, did you truly believe I'd make this move without thorough vetting? You always thought I was incapable of looking past the surface. Apex Logistics is drowning, yes, but it's drowning in mismanagement and moral compromise. Your specialty. My legal team spent the last week isolating those tainted assets. The regulatory liabilities are significant, yes, but they are also separate. I've purchased the operational infrastructure, the contracts that aren't under immediate scrutiny, and the physical real estate. The toxic shell is still attached to you, waiting for the right federal agency to condemn it." I tapped the certified letter again. "My purchase agreement explicitly shields Apothecary Bloom from any pre-existing Apex litigation stemming from those specific federal claims. You, however, are still the signatory on all those questionable deals. You're the fall guy, Mark. You get to stay on the payroll to manage the internal chaos of the liabilities you created, and I get the shipping routes and the warehouse space I actually wanted. It's poetic justice, really." He staggered slightly, pushing his chair back just enough to look like he was ready to bolt, yet paralyzed by the reality that his very livelihood and reputation was now tied to the woman he'd mocked. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice regaining a dangerous edge. "You think you've won? You think a logistics company is going to teach you how to really play this game? I will find a loophole. I will expose every corner you cut to secure this deal, and I will burn this company down around you, brick by manufactured brick." I walked slowly around the long, polished table until I was standing directly behind his chair. I leaned down, placing my hands lightly on the back of his expensive, now deeply uncomfortable suit jacket. "Mark," I purred, bringing my mouth close to his ear, ensuring every person in that room heard the razor-sharp edge beneath my sweetness. "You forget, I was married to you for 10 years. I know your game better than you know your own reflection. I know where you hide the dirty money. I know which junior associates you threatened to fire if they didn't fudge the numbers. And I know exactly where you've been funneling the subsidiary funds to try and cover this mess." His eyes widened again, this time not with rage, but with pure, unadulterated terror. He had confided in me, boasted to me, during those long, wine-soaked nights when he felt invincible. He had exposed the underbelly of Apex to his naive, starry-eyed wife. "I have access to your personal hard drives, Mark. The encrypted backups you told me were impenetrable. Remember the password? It was our anniversary date followed by Apex Sucks 1. You were always so sentimental." He choked, a desperate wet sound. That knowledge, the proof of his deepest corruption, was now mine. It was the ultimate insurance policy, a nuclear deterrent against any future defiance. "You own the company now, Sarah," he whispered, defeated. "What do you want me to do? As my new employer?" I straightened up, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. "First, you will schedule the meeting with the bank for the house mortgage transfer. I want the deed back in my name by Tuesday. Second, you will brief my COO on all regulatory pressure points, and I mean all of them, by the end of the day. Third," I paused, letting the anticipation build one last agonizing time. I needed to ensure he understood the absolute power dynamic. I had to dismantle him completely, starting with the very foundation he'd built his pride on, his physical space. "Third, I want you to pack every single personal item out of your study tonight. Everything. Because tomorrow, when I'm done with the official board handover and I've finished setting up my new executive suite in the corner office, I'm going to have a team come in. They aren't just changing the locks on the house, Mark. They are clearing out your entire office here at Apex. Every trophy, every framed picture of your golf swing, every tacky plaque. I want that space sterile by sunrise." Mark rose shakily from his seat, gripping the table edge for balance. His humiliation was palpable, a physical force in the room. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to threaten again, but before any sound could escape, the door to the boardroom burst open. It wasn't one of my staff. It was a grim-faced federal agent, flanked by 2 uniformed officers, his ID badge already displayed. He didn't even look at the rest of the terrified board members. His eyes went straight to Mark. "Mr. Vance? We have a warrant for your immediate arrest based on the findings related to the Apex Logistics offshore transfers. We need you to come with us now." The federal agent's voice cut through the tension like a cold steel wire. Mark froze, his breath hitching in his throat. The terror that had been simmering beneath his surface broke through, flooding his features in a gruesome mask of realization. This was not just a business defeat. This was the total annihilation of his life. "Arrest?" Mark stammered, looking wildly between the agent and me, searching for any sign that I had orchestrated this final, devastating blow. He saw only the calm satisfaction etched on my face. "I told you I had access to everything, Mark," I said softly, not moving from my position behind his chair. I felt a dark, exhilarating sense of completion. He had mocked my handmade soaps, calling them small and insignificant. But it was the small details, the secrets I'd observed in the quiet moments of our marriage that had become the keys to his downfall. The agent stepped forward, moving with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Vance, do not resist. You are being detained pending formal charges regarding wire fraud and misappropriation of federal contract funds." Mark, adrenaline finally overriding the shock, tried to shove past the agent. "This is a witch hunt. Sarah set you up. She's running a shell corporation. Check her books." The agent didn't flinch. His partner moved smoothly to block Mark's path, effectively boxing him against the wall. "The legality of the Apex acquisition is being handled separately, Mr. Vance. This warrant is based on evidence obtained from digital repositories seized at an earlier date. Do you understand the charges?" Mark finally slumped, the fight draining out of him as completely as the color from his skin. He knew. He knew those encrypted hard drives contained the proof of his deeper crimes, the ones that went beyond just skirting regulations for the sake of profit. He knew I had kept the evidence that would send him away for years, reserving it as the ultimate safety net. "You used me," he whispered to me, his voice raspy, the accusation holding a strange mix of self-loathing and awe. "You married me to get close to the business, didn't you? All of it. The compliments, the support. It was all a long con." I stepped away from the chair, walking to the window to watch the city sprawl beneath us. My city now. I turned back, letting the cold daylight illuminate my expression. "I married you because I loved you, Mark, for a while. But when you started to see me as nothing more than an accessory, a decorative failure, that's when the con began. You showed me the blueprints of your fortress. All I had to do was wait for the right structural weakness." The agent placed his hand firmly on Mark's shoulder. "We're going, Mr. Vance." Mark allowed himself to be led toward the door, his steps heavy, defeated. He paused at the threshold, his eyes locking onto mine one last time. It wasn't hate I saw there now. It was a horrifying, clear recognition of a superior opponent. "You may have bought the building, Sarah," he managed, his voice catching on the word building, as if the sheer act of owning the physical space was an unbearable insult. "But you'll never run it. You're a soap maker. You understand scent and texture. You don't understand distribution lines, global freight contracts, or geopolitical risk. The moment I'm out of here, the vultures you shielded me from, the ones I was protecting the company from, they'll descend on your asset, and you'll realize you bought a sinking ship that's about to be boarded by pirates." He was escorted out, the heavy boardroom door clicking shut behind them, leaving the silence to rush back in, colder and heavier than before. "Mr." Henderson wiped his brow with a trembling hand. "Well, that was dramatic. Ms. Vance, we need to establish continuity immediately. The Shanghai freighter is due to dock in 6 hours, carrying the Q3 components for the entire Southeast Asia division. If we miss that window, the penalties alone could bankrupt "Stop," I commanded, raising a hand. I walked back to the table, picked up the final, signed transfer documents, and looked down at the impressive, sprawling Apex Logistics logo stamped on the bottom of every page. Mark was right about one thing. I understood scent and texture. I understood the meticulous craft of creating something from raw, unassuming materials. But I also understood logistics because I had perfected the logistics of a completely unexpected life overhaul. And Mark's final threat about the incoming freighter and the immediate financial cliff resonated in a way that felt too convenient, too loud. I remembered the small, almost imperceptible detail Mark had mentioned in passing during one of his drunken bragging sessions. A tiny loophole in the initial government contract that allowed for a force majeure clause regarding specific high-risk, low-value components that were routinely substituted by the primary contractor in times of market instability. He had always scoffed at that clause, viewing it as an archaic piece of junk code in an otherwise solid agreement. But if he was intentionally trying to scare me away from the assets he couldn't keep, why would he draw attention to the one thing he knew I had zero expertise in? Freight scheduling. Unless he wasn't trying to scare me away from the assets. He was trying to make sure I focused all my attention on the immediate problem, while the real disaster was being set in motion elsewhere. I spun around and barked into the secure line on my desk. "Get me Agent Davies, the one handling the evidence seizure from Vance's personal servers. I need to know if they found anything regarding offshore accounts outside of the immediate Apex structure." The connection took agonizing seconds to establish. When Agent Davies finally picked up, his voice was flat, professional, and far too cautious. "Ms. Vance, we are currently processing the seized drives. We found extensive evidence supporting the charges we brought against Mr. Vance. But yes, we did find something else, something highly irregular, encrypted under a completely different protocol. It seems to be tied to a private holding corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. We flagged it as suspicious, but it was outside the scope of the initial warrant. We were waiting for authorization to proceed." My blood ran cold. The Cayman Islands. That was where he kept the real nest egg, the one he swore he would never touch. "What's the name of that holding corporation, Agent?" I demanded, my voice barely a breath. Davies paused, clearly pulling up the preliminary file. "It's called Bloom Holdings, LLC." The name echoed in the vast, silent boardroom, a malicious, mocking sound that drowned out the nervous shuffling of Mr. Henderson and the distant sirens fading into the city noise. Bloom Holdings, LLC. My own company name, twisted into a grotesque parody, now tethered to Mark's deepest financial secrets. "Repeat that, Agent Davies," I commanded, my voice dangerously low. I leaned my knuckles onto the polished surface of the table, the cold wood a sudden anchor against the rising tide of nausea. "Bloom Holdings, LLC, ma'am, registered in the Cayman Islands. Initial transfer logs show massive recurring deposits originating from Apex subsidiary accounts over the last 4 years. The amounts are substantial, far exceeding anything found in the domestic fraud logs." Davies's voice was tight with professional alarm. "We suspect this entity was Mark Vance's personal slush fund, but the kicker is the ownership structure." I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear the finality of the confirmation, the undeniable proof that Mark had not only betrayed me professionally, but had tried to steal my very identity as his final act of sabotage. "Who is listed as the beneficial owner, Agent?" There was a beat of silence so heavy I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. The beneficial owner is listed under a complex trust structure, but the initial signatory, the sole signatory given power of attorney to liquidate the assets upon Mr. Vance's incapacitation or imprisonment, is listed as S. Vance. My breath caught. S. Vance. Sarah Vance. He hadn't just set me up to take the fall for Apex's legitimate liabilities. He had built a parallel financial fortress using my name, positioning me, the scorned ex-wife, as the ultimate inheritor of his hidden fortune, contingent upon his arrest. But why? Why leave a massive, untraceable fortune linked to my name, ensuring that when he went down, I would rise infinitely wealthier but irrevocably implicated in the offshore scheme? "Agent Davies," I said, my mind racing, trying to process the layers of Mark's cruelty. "If he's been arrested, what happens to the POA? Does that make me the custodian of Bloom Holdings immediately?" "That's the legal gray area, Miss Vance. Typically, yes. But given the nature of the underlying fraud involving Apex, the moment we confirm this shell corporation is linked to the main investigation, the assets will be immediately frozen pending a full review, likely by the DOJ's money laundering task force. If you accept control now, you walk right into a federal investigation of your own." He was right. If I tried to claim Bloom Holdings now, I would be instantly linked to Mark's deepest crimes. It was a poison pill, wrapped in velvet and tied with a bow made of my own initial. If I took the soap business, I was safe. But poor relative to him. If I claimed the hidden fortune, I was rich beyond measure, but facing life in prison for international financial conspiracy. This was his masterpiece. He destroyed his company publicly, forcing me to buy the wreckage, ensuring I focused all my energy on the immediate, visible cleanup. But the real trap wasn't the freight schedule. It was the golden handcuffs of his secret wealth. "Thank you, Agent Davies. Do not freeze the assets yet. I need time to consult counsel. I will be in touch." I terminated the call before he could object. I turned back to Mr. Henderson, who looked like he was about to faint from the sheer volume of financial catastrophe unfolding in 5 minutes. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice regaining its executive steel, though my insides were churning with dread. "Forget the Shanghai freighter for 1 second. We need to pull every single shipping manifest from the last 2 years. I want to know exactly which components were substituted, which suppliers were used, and who authorized the switch on the low-value, high-risk cargo contracts. Specifically, I need the paper trail leading directly back to the external auditors Mark used for those specific audits." Henderson sputtered. "But the freighter is due in 6 hours. If we miss that window, the contractual breach will cripple our quarterly revenue." "Revenue we just purchased at a discount because of this impending collapse," I countered sharply. "Mark told me I don't understand distribution. Prove him wrong. I don't care about the freighter right now. I care about the audit trail that leads to Bloom Holdings. Find me the name of the external auditor Mark trusted implicitly, the one who signed off on the low-value component substitution reports." Henderson, sensing the shift in gravity, that the immediate operational crisis was now secondary to a looming federal indictment, scrambled for his briefcase. There was only one firm Mark relied on exclusively for the internal risk assessments that fed into those specific government clauses, a small boutique firm based out of Delaware, Sterling and Pierce. My hands were shaking now, not with rage, but with the chilling premonition of what I was about to uncover, Sterling and Pierce. I remembered hearing Mark mention them once, dismissing them as overpriced consultants he kept around for deniability. I slammed my fist lightly on the desk, making the papers jump. Get Sterling and Pierce on the line now. Tell them their biggest client just fell into my lap, and I need to know everything their firm signed off on for Apex Logistics in the last 5 years. Tell them I'm offering them a chance to cooperate before the feds move on to their offices. Henderson fumbled with the phones, his face gray. As he dialed the number for the small Delaware firm, I stared out the window again, the city looking less like my conquest and more like a battlefield littered with traps. Mark hadn't just sold me a company, he'd sold me a ticking bomb disguised as a treasure chest, and the clock for the real detonation had just started. When Henderson finally held the phone out, his eyes wide with fresh horror, he didn't speak. He simply mouthed a single word, disconnected. Before I could demand an explanation, my personal assistant rushed in, her face pale, clutching a small padded envelope marked, "For Sarah Vance personal delivery." "Ma'am, this package was left at the loading dock 5 minutes ago. The courier refused to give a name. It wasn't scanned through security." I snatched the envelope. It was heavy, expensive paper. Inside, there wasn't a note, but a single high-resolution photograph. It was a close-up, crisp image of the signature page on the final, binding agreement for Bloom Holdings, LLC. The line item for the appointed liquidator, the person who would gain control if Mark were imprisoned, was clearly visible, signed with a looping, feminine script that perfectly matched my own handwriting from college. And underneath the signature, scrawled hastily in thick black marker, was a message from Mark. "Check the vault beneath the old potting shed, darling. Your real tools are waiting." The photograph felt like a physical blow. The signature was undeniably mine, an old, almost forgotten flourish from my early days, dredged up from some forgotten document Mark must have scanned years ago. He hadn't just framed me. He had prepared me for the frame, using my own identity as the perfect legal camouflage for his ultimate escape route. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He wanted me to inherit the ultimate financial crime, to spend the rest of my life untangling a billion-dollar web of international fraud that he had meticulously woven, using my name as the lock and key. But the second line of his message, "Check the vault beneath the old potting shed, darling. Your real tools are waiting," was the real twist, the potting shed. That was the dilapidated, unused shed behind the small rented workshop where I had first started making my artisan soaps a year ago. A place Mark had laughed at, a place I'd abandoned when Apothecary Bloom moved into the warehouse. It was a desperate Hail Mary. Mark was cornered, facing prison time for the Apex liabilities he couldn't shield himself from. But he was buying time. Time for me to be distracted by the gleaming, poisonous bait of Bloom Holdings, while simultaneously hoping I'd be curious enough to check the shed, thus potentially stepping into the deeper trap he'd laid there. Mr. Henderson was still babbling about Sterling and Pierce's disconnected phone line, but I tuned him out. The freighter could sink for all I cared. This was no longer about logistics, it was about survival. "Mr. Henderson, clear my schedule. Cancel every meeting. I need a secure vehicle and a driver who can keep their mouth shut. We are going to my old workshop site. Immediately." The ride across town was a blur of tense silence. My driver, a silent ex-military security specialist I'd hired for my warehouse, kept his focus on the road, sensing the absolute gravity of the situation. As we pulled up to the familiar, slightly dilapidated small industrial park, I stared at the tiny, rusting shed. It looked exactly as I remembered it. Neglected, slightly overgrown, a monument to my humble beginnings. The lock was new, heavy-duty brass, completely out of place against the peeling paint of the shed door. It wasn't the type of lock Mark would use. It was professional grade. I approached cautiously, the afternoon sun casting long, suspicious shadows. Mark's game always involved misdirection. If he wanted me to look here, it meant the real danger wasn't in the shed, but that the shed itself was a distraction from the impending federal freeze on Bloom Holdings. I tried the handle anyway. Locked. I radioed my security man to breach the lock discreetly. As the metal groaned under the forced entry, I noticed something I'd missed in my haste, a faint, almost invisible spray pattern on the concrete slab immediately adjacent to the shed's foundation. It was barely noticeable, but it suggested recent, localized disturbance. The shed door swung open. The interior was dusty, smelling of old earth and dried herbs. There were no elaborate safes, no hidden documents revealing the true ownership of Bloom Holdings. There was only a single, antique wooden chest tucked under a shelf, the kind Mark's grandmother used to own, and on top of the chest lay a single key, an old-fashioned skeleton key. I picked it up. It was heavy and cold. I looked back at the concrete slab outside, the disturbed area. "Give me a shovel," I told my driver. We worked quickly, scraping away the thin veneer of fresh concrete dust. Beneath it, the original concrete was scored with a barely visible seam, a hatch. The skeleton key fit perfectly. The hatch lifted with a grinding sound, revealing a small, airtight vault, far more sophisticated than the flimsy lock on the shed door suggested. This was Mark's real hideout. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, were 3 things. First, a stack of physical passports in different names, one bearing a startlingly good likeness of Mark Vance. He had planned his escape meticulously. Second, a data drive, military-grade encryption, clearly containing the complete unredacted logs of all Apex overseas transactions, including the names of the foreign officials he'd bribed. Evidence strong enough to sink dozens of powerful people, not just him. And third, tucked beneath the drive, was a final folded piece of paper, written in Mark's familiar, arrogant script. It read, "Enjoy your soap business, Sarah. The moment you open that drive, the feds won't be looking for me. They'll be looking for the custodian of the evidence. I'm gone. But I made sure you got the real leverage. You wanted to destroy me? Fine. But you're going to have to choose. Save your little soap empire from the Apex liabilities you inherited, or take down the entire corrupt infrastructure that supported it. You can't do both without implicating yourself in every single crime." He hadn't just left me the burden, he'd left me the weapon, knowing that using it would implicate me under the strict regulations surrounding the acquisition of evidence tied to federal investigations. He had ensured that my ultimate victory, exposing the rot, would come at the cost of my own hard-won freedom and the pristine image of Apothecary Bloom. As I stared at the hard drive, the weight of the decision crushing me, my secure phone began to vibrate incessantly. It wasn't Agent Davies. It was Mr. Henderson from the boardroom. "Ms. Vance, you won't believe this. The authorities just called back. The Shanghai freighter, it never sailed. The dock workers refused to load it. They're staging a massive, coordinated strike across all regional ports. It's completely paralyzed. They are citing unforeseen environmental hazards related to the Q3 components. It looks like someone tipped off the union reps to the toxicity of the substitution materials before the ship could leave port." My blood ran cold again. The toxicity of the substitution materials. The very components Sterling and Pierce had signed off as safe. Someone hadn't just frozen the assets. Someone had proactively scuttled the immediate operational crisis. I looked down at the evidence drive, the ultimate proof of global corruption, and then back at the photo of the Bloom Holdings ownership. Mark was gone. The assets were frozen. And now, the company I bought was collapsing around me, not due to the slow rot he predicted, but through a targeted, lightning-fast sabotage that felt impossible for a man currently being escorted to a federal holding cell, unless the person who knew the most about Apex's weakest points, the person who knew exactly which components were toxic, the person who had just finished giving me the perfect scapegoat in the form of the Bloom Holdings POA, wasn't Mark Vance. The only person who knew about the toxic components and had the motive to neutralize the imminent crisis before I got pinned by it was the person who now controlled Apex's liability shell. I gripped the hard drive, staring at the exit of the small vault, a terrifying realization dawning. If Mark was in custody and the strike neutralized the toxic shipment, who was the third party benefiting from the absolute chaos of Apex logistics right now? I looked at my phone. Henderson was still pleading for direction. I knew what I had to do. I keyed in Agent Davies's direct line, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Agent Davies, forget the Cayman Islands for a moment. I need you to immediately investigate the financial movements of Mr. Henderson, the CFO of Apex. Cross-reference any large, recent deposits with the names of the environmental consultants who just flagged the Q3 freighter shipment. I think you'll find my victory was short-lived, and that the real spider in this web just inherited the whole damn company.